This can be seen there. We are being live streamed. We are now on Twitch. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for coming and watching our next installment of GameRT's Twitch series, Roundtable, where we bring together several librarians, have a chance to talk about games, libraries, games and libraries, this time comic books in libraries as well, and all the ways we can bring play into our spaces. My name's Danielle Costello. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the event programming co-chair for GameRT. I'm a research and instruction librarian for Louisiana State, and today I'm here to moderate and pick up questions from chat. With me today, we have several guests from GNCRT. Friends, if you'd like to introduce yourself, from my screen, I can see Julia at the top, and then Sean and Amy, if you go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Lanter. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the assistant director at Exeter Public Library in the great state of New Hampshire. And I'm also the intellectual freedom co-chair for our state. And I'm happy to be talking with you today. Sean, I'll swing it to you.
Hi, I'm Sean Norton. My pronouns are he, they, and I am the materials manager for Carroll County Public Library in Carroll County, Maryland. So basically what that means is I purchase everything, all the materials. I'm also a book reviewer on various sites. You can go ahead and try to track me down. On to you, Amy.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Wright. I am by day a PhD student, currently looking at the history of comic book censorship in Canada and the US, but sort of by evening and a lot of other free time, I am the chair of the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable's newest committee, the Addressing Comic Book Bans and Challenges, of which we are all members. And I guess in yesteryears, I was actually the GNCRT's first president.
And with us from the Games Roundtable side is our very own Molly Porter. Molly, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, yeah, my name is Molly Porter. My pronouns are she, her. I am an adult services librarian at a public library in Louisiana, and I am soon to be a board member as well of the Games and Gaming Roundtable.
Excellent. Now, thank you all for introducing yourselves. So everyone knows this event is being held live. However, if you need to leave or would like to watch again, the Twitch video on demand will be accessible right after we end. And then if you aren't following us on GameRT Twitch, please do so you can keep up to date with all the latest mayhem and shenanigans and different talks that we're going to be doing on the channel. For anyone previously not familiar with GameRT, we are the Games and Gaming Roundtable of the American Library Association. Our mission is to promote gaming in libraries, whether it's programming, collection development, community building, prototyping, playtesting, research, or discussions like this. If you're interested in diving any deeper into any of those, we'll provide links throughout the chat discussion and in chat for our blog, Facebook, and Discord, as well as all the events that you can watch later in the month. Speaking of, we do have two events coming up. One next Friday, April 21st at 12 o'clock will be from the webinar of Foundry 10, Role Reflect, How Youth Can Build Social Emotional Skills with Tabletop Playing Games. Join us to see how TTRPGs can benefit you and your young patrons. And then on April 28th for our spring super spectacular, we are partnering again with GNCRT as well as FMRT to talk about superheroes and how they impact all of our favorite media. So join us for roundtable discussions, dramatic readings, audience chats, script readings, and TTRPG actual play. Again, all the links for that will be added. So that all said, let's get on to with today's roundtable. We are going to be talking about censorship within comics, within libraries, within games, and how that's affecting all of our libraries today. I'm going to start by handing the topic off to our GNCRT folk to kind of give us an introduction of their association and the committee and kind of what they're doing and the work they're building right now.
I guess we should have talked about this. Who wants to talk first? I can kick it off if y'all want.
Yeah, I mean, for an overview of the committee, that's definitely you, Amy.
It's probably me, yeah.
Amy, so, you're our superhero.
Yeah, so the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable, we get our status, so we were incorporated as a roundtable just a few years ago, actually. So comics librarianship has been around for several decades. You know, we've been doing stuff at ALA Annual since the mid-2000s, but as an official roundtable, we were just approved in 2018. Our first board came into office just in 2019. So it's actually not that long ago. So last year, our current presidents actually paying attention to what was happening, most prominently, of course, with mouse being pulled in Tennessee schools, hearing about Jerry Craft's New Kid being pulled from school boards. I mean, after it had won the Newbery, first graphic novel to win, they had had the idea of striking a new committee specifically talking about comic book bans and challenges, because for those of us, I think, who work in any kind of visual and popular culture, we know disproportionately that visual and popular culture pops up in bans and challenge lists. I mean, Dave Pilkey's Captain Underpants has been a mainstay, and Tango Makes Three, a picture book, you know, so we know that there is concerns around content and also format. So there's this intertwined idea, especially around kids and harm and things depicted visually. And I think also with comic books, and all of us who work in comic books know that there tends to be still not as much awareness in terms of the collecting that there should be. And this actually creates an environment in which challenges are far easier to pop up. We still see comic books that are intended for adult audiences popping up in the kids collection because there are prevalent ideas about comic books are for kids. And one of the things we had specifically with this committee was to try to give our membership, so we have several thousand members now, just on the ground support specifically if comic book bans and challenges popped up, because we know that the people who tend to be the comics advocates in their libraries are still usually running solo advocacy missions. Maybe there's 2 people in the library who are comic book fans, but there doesn't tend to be enough of us. So the committee started in February of last year. Do you two maybe, because you both have been on the committee since, do you want to maybe jump in and talk about some of the work we've done with the toolkit, or maybe some of the things we found with our survey? Julia, do you want to start? Then over to Sean.
Well, I will do a shout out for our toolkit that is available online through the GNCRT website. I always get acronyms wrong. So what we really want to emphasize is look at your collection development and reconsideration policies. That is something that is going to help and protect your collections when you get a challenge. And I almost want to say it's gonna happen, people. Don't assume it's not gonna happen to you. It's gonna happen eventually. So be prepared. If you haven't touched it in 2 years, you need to look at it. It's old. It needs to be updated. And look at the language as well of what you're calling things. Digital today means an audio visual today means a lot different things than it did back in the 90s and 80s. So please also don't panic, as the great Douglas Adams says. This toolkit shows you that you can get through this. There's clear steps that you can make. The Office of Intellectual Freedom is a great resource as well. But if this toolkit is a great little thing to put in your toolkit for yourself for when you're doing your library work, because it's going to happen, people. Don't assume not here. Just assume when. And I'm not sure, Sean, if you wanted to talk a little bit about, we were talking about the toolkit, if you wanted to talk about our survey, maybe?
Yeah, so we had a fairly large and well marketed survey that we did separate from past things from GNCRT or from the Office of Intellectual Freedom or Information Freedom. I always forget what the I is specifically. And the biggest takeaway I had from that is something Julia had already mentioned, is collection development policies aren't really being updated as often as they should. I think at a bare minimum, anytime you are expanding what you are collecting, so if your library is starting to add board games, look at your collection development policy. Make sure that what you're trying to do is covered. And if it's not covered, revise the policy until it is, because having a policy in place that's been approved by your administrative team, that's been approved by a board of trustees or a school administration, whoever your library is responsible to, having this in place will make it much easier for them to have your back when this comes down. And, you know, a good administrator in any of these libraries should have your back anyway, but sometimes there are other concerns that crop up, and this is just an extra tool that helps protect your collection and protect your job, because in some cases they're even asking librarians or teachers to resign over this stuff. And I don't know, I feel like if there are ways to prevent that, it's not worth losing your job over. You need, if at all possible, find a way to collect the materials that your patrons, that your users want and need, and a way to continue to do that in the future. And having an up-to-date collection development policy, having a clear reconsideration or challenge policy, and detailed steps for all of your processes. If how you select graphic novels is different from how you select any other book, you need to write out in detail why and how. Same goes for game collections. The library that I manage, the Carroll County Public Library, we collect video games, and we have rules around that are pretty in line with how we collect things like movies and TV shows, because that's the closest analog that we have. But it's not exact, and those policies need to be updated and clear. I feel like I've said that 5 times, so it's good.
Yeah, I love it. I love the emphasis, because it is really important, because even though we are Games and Gaming Roundtable, we're all librarians of generally multiple medias in our collections. And so regardless of if we're looking at games or if we're thinking about comics and what the censorship and challenges are coming down, it's going to be all of our media pretty soon. And I think we kind of have a long list of things to discuss today, but that's one of the things, is a lot of our media, despite the various formats in it, have a lot of reasons why they get censored. And kind of like, if we think about so the Satanic Panic in Dungeons and Dragons, or violence in video games, a lot of the same language to take them out of, you know, collections and bookstores is the same language that's used right now for the challenges as well. And so if anybody would like to talk on kind of maybe Molly as well, the challenges that you're seeing and facing.
Yeah, so I mentioned at the top that I am a librarian in Louisiana, and Louisiana is currently undergoing a lot of legal challenges at the moment. So on the front line of that nonsense, as many people are right now. I think the two things, well, first, I'd like to say that I fully agree with the collection development policy, and that was something that I was like, oh man, I need to make sure we talk about this. And then I saw our excellent resource document and saw that you all said that already lots of times. So good. But the other two things would be community outreach is really important, because the general public is your greatest ally. You need to be able to show them that you are here, you're part of this community, you care about this community, and start making those connections, especially with some of the like movers and shakers, you know, because they are going to be the ones that can help you in the long run. I will also say that in addition to community outreach, kind of to something that Julia mentioned, it's not if, it's when. I know, for instance, in Louisiana, like, these things are bills right now, but just given the political environment in Louisiana, these will pass. Some version of them will pass. And I'm not a fan of that, but you have to figure out how to work with your legislature, how to lobby your legislature, and say to them, look, it's not just that I don't like this and here's why, but here's what I think would be a better alternative, you know, because if you can take the teeth out of it as much as possible, then that's going to make your job easier in the long run. It's going to make it easier for you to provide the materials to your patrons that they want and need. So those are just things to keep in mind. As far as games, it's kind of like Danielle already mentioned, it's a little bit of the Wild West right now in terms of both challenges being received and not received yet, and policy surrounding them, because a lot of places don't address various types of games in their collection development policies or anything like that. And I think that, yeah, we haven't been as much on the radar in the last few years, but I promise you that that's going to change. It's going to be just like the 80s with the Satanic Panic. They're going to come back. And I think part of that might be this new D&D movie and people in Hollywood saying, hey, this is a cool thing. You know, I agree.
Shout out to Stranger Things.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm running D&D at our library, and my community has been like very supportive of it, but so many of those kids came because of Stranger Things. So it's just a lot of media, because they're picking up interest, you know, then it's going to pick up backlash. So just be prepared for it, because it is coming. And I will say that a lot of the parishes in Louisiana who have had, parishes is a silly word for counties. I just realized that not everyone's in Louisiana and has that silly nomenclature. A lot of the areas that have had these challenges so far, have had a lot of them, are areas where their millage is coming up for re-election soon. So they're funding, basically. So just because it's not happening for us now doesn't mean it won't in the future. It will, I'm sure, at some point. I've got a lot of thoughts and I could talk forever, but I'm going to hush now.
That's not a
And,
problem.
yeah.
Thank you for your thoughts, Molly. I'm kind of like on that idea, games, the graphic novel folks, if you'll talk about, since we're, games are kind of, we want to see what's happening now to kind of work on our future and make sure we can head and have the best possible paths when we're working with our games collection. What have you found that's been, so you talked about the toolkit, but concrete things that you have been found that's helpful for maintaining your collections and dealing with challenges? Julia, if you'll like to go.
So for, in terms of challenges, other than, I'm going to say this 30 times, be a great drinking game if you're at home. Anytime we say review your policy, take a drink, review your policy. But also, as Molly said, look into your community and make community connections now. If you've heard of asset mapping, grab a Google map and look at who your current community partners are and put little dots on it, and look at who else is in the committee, who are the mover and shakers, who have the power. Usually it's not the people in charge. And then go out and make connections with them. The other thing is looking at the other side. In New Hampshire, the other side is moving very quickly. A bill would come up, a draft would come up on a Saturday, and they'd vote on it on the Monday morning. So they were working very quickly because they were well organized. So we have to be well organized too. And also we have to remember that darned right to know law. So be careful where you're discussing this, and making sure that you're using, maybe your state needs to have a chat service set up to help people communicate, that they can do off the, the public sector. I think a lot of librarians are revealing things that we don't want to say to the public right now. The other thing is, we also need to remember to really emphasize what we do in our communities. We are awesome assets. We all know this. When someone sits us down and says, well, what can your library do for me? It's going to be a couple of hours. So we really want to make sure we know how to have our elevator pitches. Like, I think every librarian in this country needs an elevator pitch, so we can go out into our communities and get even more people behind us. And they already are. Last year's ALA report, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, in the 70s, supported not removing items from the shelves. So we have their support, but we have to make sure they're supporting us in the voting booth when our budgets are coming up, because that's a big thing in New Hampshire. Budgets are getting cut. And that's how they're coming after libraries. So research what's going on, not just in your state, but in the ones we're mentioning scary places like Florida and Louisiana and Texas. So research where these organizations are starting, because they're coming for you next. Sorry, off of my little stool.
Yeah, that's what the roundtable's for, is to go into these kind of areas and dig deeper. Amy, how do you think we can all organize best as librarians and connect to each other? Because you have been a president of a roundtable, and you are helping to organize kind of this collective against censorship. What do you think are good kind of ways we can connect to each other and kind of build that structure?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll start with a negative and hopefully end on a positive. One of the biggest things that came out of our survey is, I think for us, concrete proof of something that we had long suspected, especially around comic books, which is we have a few professional things we don't really want to talk about. And I think internal censorship and gatekeeping is one of the biggest ones, especially around, certain books, certain content, certain formats. And it pops up in terms of what libraries choose to buy and what they don't choose to buy, what displays they put up or what displays they don't put up. And we've long seen this in comic book collections. I mean, they have, to use business lingo, one of the best ROIs, like return on investment, in terms of investiture for a library. And so if you're trying to maximize your budget and show fiscal responsibility to, your public, why wouldn't you actually invest in something that had such a strong ROI? And yet we consistently see a lot of library budgets still are not as large. They may have a whole wall of bestsellers for adult collections, even though most adult collections don't move proportionately as much as children collections or teen collections do. So we see it pop up in a lot of budget, but then also that advocacy piece. I mean, I do think it's quite striking that not enough people were upset that New Kid was pulled off the shelf. It won the Newbery. I mean, the Newbery is by no means I would say it's kind of a conservative library award. So I think the best thing we can do is, and this also demands us to shake off something that I think a lot of librarians wear like an unfortunate cape. We're not neutral. We do have to actually figure out what's going on. We have to know restrictions or legislature of a particular state or province. I'm American, but I also have Canadian citizenship, and I've been living in Canada. So know your province too, or know your state, or, we've heard from friends in Australia that this is starting to pop up there. So, and ensure that you're having very concrete step-by-step discussions. I think that's one of the best things to prepare, and just have these being part of ongoing conversations. One of the things we've also heard is that people may have had on the job training for this, but it's like a one and done kind of a training way back when. It's not something that's built in as an ongoing policy and discussion even now. So I think just understanding that this can happen to all of us. One of our panelists in our last webinar, we have a webinar series ongoing. Our next webinar will be May 17th. So we just had one the middle of March, and one of our panelists, Dawn Zimmer, who's actually based in Mississippi, in her library system, they have talking points at every single circulation desk so that everybody is on board. And it's not something that's referred to a manager or director. Everybody has certain talking points so that when somebody brings something to the desk, everyone's aware and is like, this is our policy. Like, here's the papers to fill out if you want, but like, let's talk through. And like, they know, well, actually, did you know in the library Bill of Rights? So that everybody feels involved and everybody can actually, I wouldn't even just say push back. Everybody can remind the people bringing these concerns that like, we're actually here to serve everybody, not just like you and your concerns. So I do think more of us need to understand that this isn't a marginal issue. This is one of like the most fundamental issues in our profession, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Thank you, Amy. And for all the kind of ways to connect GNCRT and their programming, that is in the resource doc, as well as kind of more webinars and more training, because I know I feel myself like ill prepared to deal with a lot of things, but through training and through discussions, I think we can get to that, a little bit more comfortable kind of place. And I think as librarians, we have so much to offer with our various medias. I think Amy was commented on email, talked about how we're kind of the weird kids of the library world with games and comics and film and media as well. But through those kinds of fandoms, I think there's a lot of love and a lot of passion within our communities. And so, like you said, Molly, being able to connect to them. So what do, and this is an open question to all of you, but Sean, you haven't chatted for just a second. So what do we think about, like, why is it that these particular types of books and media are the ones that are getting banned? What is kind of a central maybe theme that we keep seeing recur over and over, that, or that you've seen that, like, these are the reasons that they're getting banned? Oop, there we go.
Yeah. So the two types of things, two types of material that I see the most challenges for are children materials, youth materials. Lots of people kind of couch their complaint in a think of the children kind of way. Even if it's not a youth material, you know, a child might see the cover, and that's the problem. And then we also see it more with visual materials. So, you know, yes, of course, graphic novels, and that's where my heart really is, but also in movies and video games. And it's because that old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you're going to go to a town hall meeting or a school board meeting, all angry and riled up, and you want to use your 5 minutes to show everybody that this is obscene, it's a lot easier to make that point if you just pick, you know, one panel of a comic that might have, say, a depiction of genitalia in it, than it is to read out loud a paragraph describing that. It's an embarrassment factor. It takes more time. It takes more effort. You actually have to read the thing to find where these things are instead of just flipping through until you see something titillating. And that's a huge part of it. It's just easier to get angry about, and it's harder, and it's easier to do so without reading the whole material and without the kind of self-embarrassment. You know, if somebody was trying to challenge, I know this was the thing a decade ago, people are challenging 50 Shades of Grey. You know, it's much more personally difficult to read a passage of that out loud at a town hall meeting than it is to just show a panel from Genderqueer and say, look at this. Isn't this obscene? And, like, you know, no, it's not obscene. Obscenity is an actual legal term, and it has strict rules and laws around it. And something's not just obscene because you don't like it or because it has body parts or violence or anything. That's not what makes something obscene, not really. And to loop back for a second, that's the other thing I want people to be aware of and to do. In addition to your collection development policy, know the laws where you work. So know what your obscenity rules are in the state or county or country that you're working in. And also know what is going to potentially be on the docket coming up. Make sure that your collection development policy doesn't contradict your laws. And if possible, if you work with a larger library system that might have a lawyer on staff or on retainer, talk to them. That's why they're there. I'm not saying that every librarian needs to individually go out and hire a lawyer. You do not. And if you make a normal librarian wage, you cannot afford to do that. But if you have access to one on an institutional level, you know, they might be there to protect the library or the city more than they are to you, but they are still, that's still in their best interest to make sure that whatever you're doing lines up with what's legal. And that gives you another layer of defense when somebody comes and says, hey, this comic is obscene and it's corrupting all the youth. And, you know, in D&D, you can role play as an evil character. So we need to take all of that out. Yeah, because we can't have people being evil and learning how to be evil. But that, you know, playing pretend's not illegal. So good luck.
I love that you did bring up D&D and our wonderful Satanic Panic that maybe we'll see another resurrection of. It is.
I was there, Gandalf, 1,000 years ago.
it is such an interesting thing when somebody decides that playing pretend is the most evil thing you can do in the entire world. I'm like, look, the nerds are better if they're just hanging out at the table. I was reading recently, there's the APA came out with a kind of discussion and like some research on violence in video games and how video games don't lead to violence. This is, we who are nerds know this, but they put out a statement. And I was wondering if things like that, other organizations, so the American Psychological Association, other health associations, maybe different groups, not within the library field, if them putting out statements are helpful for when you're defending and protecting your collections against these challenges. And anybody can answer.
Well, I know for me, we just started a video game library in New Hampshire that's circulating consoles. And we based that under actually the UK, another country, let's shout out. The Literacy Trust had done that study linking literacy and video gaming, and especially importance to boys. And that actually, we trot that out and we have that available for parents who are concerned. And I know I'm talking to the gaming committee, so y'all probably use this already, but we love using the whole, did you know surgeons sometimes practice video gaming because that improves coordination? So I think that also for graphic novels, going and saying, well, look at how much of the brain lights up when you read a book versus a graphic novel. They're, making all these new synapses. I think the trouble with both of our organizations, the things that we're trying to represent in libraries, are they're new and they're scary to certain groups that are coming into the library, because no one likes change. So I think that's what's really important. When I talked about stump speeches, having those stump speeches also for your collections and making sure that they understand why they're useful, and maybe giving them a try too, bringing them to some nursing homes, having a book group, at your library for their adult book groups, that's a graphic novel. So making sure they're learning.
And, speaking to that same point of people, just the world is changing and people are, not necessarily up to date on everything that's happening, and they're changing social mores and everything else. I think that's part of the reason we see more challenges on teen materials and young adult materials now than we did 10, 20 years ago. It's not that, the kids are worse now or the books are worse now. It's that demographic wasn't targeted by publishers before. Teen fiction targeting, high school students and up, or 16 and up, where you can maybe discuss more sexually explicit things because that is a part of life when you're over the age of 16. And that wasn't a thing. I mean, even just having, teen publishing books didn't really pick up until the late 80s, early 90s. So that's all new, in the same way that video games are not new, but are new enough that there are people in Congress who are older than the television. So yeah, maybe they don't understand teen publishing or video games or, comics.
I will say that's, very true. I've just had a couple of thoughts. And first is, when I'm saying reach out to your community, I will also say that you would be surprised at the pockets of your community that are interested in these collections and that are willing to support you. For instance, literally within the last week or two, we have now formed, or I say we formed, they formed themselves and we're just like sponsoring them. It's a group of like 12 old ladies that come in and play board games. And it's my favorite thing. And they're wonderful. But to look at this group of people, you would not have immediately assumed, oh, they're here to play Settlers of Catan, And I say that with all the love. Yes, it's grannies who game. And I am so happy about it. But I wouldn't have known that these are patrons that would support me if I needed to go to bat for these games, and now there's this whole untapped market of patrons that are willing to do that. So that's definitely part of it. I will also say that it's important to keep in mind, I'm not talking about the instigators for all of this, but the parents that they are trying to appeal to, that they are concerned because they're coming at it from a place of care for their children. So that doesn't mean that the proposed solution is the right thing, but if we can try to show them that, like, we're doing the things we're doing because we also care, because we're not doing something like nefarious, I think that that can go a long way. Yeah.
And let's face it, like, the group we haven't talked about are the actual youth and the young people. Sadly, they're not voters yet, but they're the people we're representing. Because if you talk to any teen or kid, they're reading graphic novels. What made you fall in love with reading? 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you it's a graphic novel. And same with gaming, you know, that gets them hooked. That's how they found their best friends. And we need to communicate that effectively to the parents in the community. So we especially in the times of mental health and teens is at such a crisis. I mean, we literally are saving lives.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's super important, like you all said, to get ahead of our story, to have our pitch, to have our explanation why, despite what other people may say, our media is wonderful and glorious and good for, you know, the development of our patrons and just joy. Like, I love playing games. I'm very bad at playing games, but I love it because it builds connection and community to all the people, like not my round table, my librarian friends, but also the community within my university as well. So having a list of all those good benefits and not just like, no, you're taking it away, this is bad, but no, here's what good we do as well. And so we've kind of talked about a variety of things, but I'd like to go kind of a little bit deeper into what happens after. So we have kind of how to prevent it, kind of building allies, that kind of thing. But when you have a challenge, when you're kind of in the middle of that process, in the toolkit, there are some kind of actionable items. Could Amy, Sean, Julia talk if you could talk a little bit more about that?
So, I mean, we have a line in the toolkit, and I would like to reiterate it just, you know, live to library another day. I think one of the things that isn't talked about enough is that you will probably get a challenge in your library career, and it's okay. You know, no matter what happens, even if it didn't turn out the way you want, it doesn't have to be the end. Like, you're not alone in this. A lot of people are going through some pretty professionally upsetting scenarios right now. It's a lot of emotional labor. Like, please take care of yourself, you know? So I think like that's one of the biggest things to emphasize. And also overlap with so many things. We included on the resource document, the Urban Libraries Unite out of New York has come out with a Drag Queen Story Hour resource kit, because this is not just necessarily a format thing, like there is a content aspect. And so I think there's so much commonality. So know that there's other resources, other communities of people who are getting similar challenges that are going on. So you're not alone in this, and there are resources and tools out there. I think what can happen afterwards is also to know that there is the cycle of a challenge. So we've had many instances in which materials are pulled. Maybe they followed their policy and procedure, maybe they haven't, but materials also come back. I think it's very important to look at some success stories. I don't think we're talking about enough. Genderqueer, there's a case in the state of Virginia, and a few individuals actually filed a suit saying, you know, they found genderqueer to be obscene and actually wanted it not just on school and library shelves, but wanted it pulled from private bookshelves, which also completely goes against individual rights and freedoms and capitalism. So the ACLU chapter, so there's state by state ACLU chapter, so the American Civil Liberties Union, they actually were heavily involved in this lawsuit, as was CBLDF, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and also Oni Press that published Genderqueer. And they won. Like, the lawsuit was struck down. So I do think that as you're nearing the end sort of a challenge, it might be a cycle that maybe there is actually a hopeful thing that can come back out of it. Or certainly, as you know, you're coming down from something, be like, okay, what didn't go so well? Like, what additions do we need to make to our collection development policy, our challenge policy? What do we have to do in terms of staff advocacy? I mean, I don't think it's talked about enough with the parents. And that was great to bring out, Molly. I think a lot of people are maybe speaking out of fear or they don't know. There are parents who are saying that they're speaking for other parents. Our parents are as diverse as our students. I mean, we have grandparents, we have aunts and uncles. I mean, we have so many people involved in the raising of kids, and I think we need to reach out to more of those people and maybe even try to target like, hey, did you actually know that comics are like these multimodal learning resources? So many educational best practices talk about that. For maybe some parents who might be reticent for their kids to play games, I do think it's important to talk about the large economic video game industry. I mean, so many cities in North America have so much of their capital, so much of their best paying like jobs and professional development rooted in the video game industry. Like there's so much AI development that comes out of video game industry too. So I think it's also a matter of like assessing, okay, this is what happened. Like, how can we build from this? And just know that you're not alone. We've had a lot of library staff go through this feeling very isolated, and just to find your people and use this as a chapter, but you know, it's not the end of the book. So
real quick, GNCRT does have a Discord server where we discuss lots of things related to the roundtable and ALA and the profession as a whole, including a channel just about challenges and censorship. And members of our committee are in there. I have notifications turned on for that channel. I respond very often. A couple other members are in there as well. And so like, if this is happening, if you're in a challenge, if you need help, if you're post challenge and you need to just vent or talk through things, we're in there and you can reach us there. You can also find us through the toolkit itself and the ALA website and ALA Connect and all of those things. And also, you know, I lost my train of thought.
That is entirely fair and valid, Sean. I have done that a couple of times in this conversation. It's like, wait, I'm gonna direct us, and then it's like, oh no. Well, we'll bring it back around. See, this is a good open play space. We're still working it out. We're still figuring it out. It is a-okay. I will open the chat up to, like, if you have any questions, please definitely pop them in. There's been a nice bit of chatter around, but also if anybody has any things that we haven't talked about that you'd like to express or just get off your chest as well, or like, yeah.
I remembered.
Yes,
I remembered.
I fudged you back in. Go ahead, Sean.
When you have a challenge, so many people don't do this. When you have a challenge, report it to ALA, report it to the Office of Information Freedom. They have an entire page for it. It's a little form. You can give as much information as you want or as little information as you want. Someone from them will also reach back out to you if you need it, even if you don't need any help. And I've been defending challenges for 3 or 4 years now, and I have not needed outside assistance with it. I still report. That data is important. It helps the profession. It helps us advocate. Please, please, please report challenges, bans, anything.
And we have to do a shout out for soft challenges too. We talked a little bit about them, but I have heard from so many librarians saying, well, it was going to be so much trouble, so I just decided not to buy it. I mean, that is really dangerous. And I think a lot of our people in our field, you know, they need the support so they can feel like they can include things into their collection. But also that's good. That's data we really have difficulty gathering. What is it, like 85%, I think, of the challenges go unreported.
unreported.
Unreported, sorry, unreported.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It's totally crazy.
And I should say that it's awesome to bring that up, Shauna and Julia, such good points, especially in a situation like that. If it's an issue of internal censorship, that, you know, soft gatekeeping, that is a challenge. So for example, if you take New Kid, which is a children's graphic novel, and you move it to the teen section or behind the desk, that is censorship. Please, please, please report it. Oh, the OIF form is entirely anonymous. It's not going to be tracked back to you, but it is important to tabulate how often this is happening, what titles, what content, and also the challenge form is for programs too. So if there's a program thing, a meeting room thing, or any other sort of internal debates, if your gut is telling you this doesn't feel like something that is falling along the lines of intellectual freedom or the library serving all, it probably isn't. So please, please, please report it.
Excellent. And we have that link in the chat. On that, like, I kind of would like to talk a little bit more about programs, because that is an interesting area, because games sometimes, like, a lot of people don't know what the game is that they want to ban. Like, they know Dungeons and Dragons, but it's less of that we have books sometimes in our collection and more that we're just playing it. So definitely if you see those challenges for programming as well. I think, let me look, no chat questions, but if anybody else has a discussion, we got censorship. We got that. I don't want us to end because we still have 15 minutes, but I'm kind of like, oh, everybody got everything very quickly.
Well,
Does
I
anybody?
I
can,
will
I
say
can,
the only
oh, good.
gaming program challenge I've ever had was a video game program, and the Xbox One console that I usually used broke, and I could not repair it in time. So I used a Wii U that I had, and the complaint was that the game sucked,
Well.
and were old.
Well,
And I was like, "You're not wrong, but."
I think you can be as perfect as possible, or whatever our understanding of perfect is for a game, a program, or anything, and you will still get a survey that says you didn't do the thing, even though you did the thing that I wanted you to do. It's like, okay, thank you, survey. Yeah, I appreciate your input.
Your feedback has been recorded.
Oh goodness. So what, does anybody have currently right now, does anybody have any experience with a current comic or game that they're having to deal with and is being challenged?
Well, I can talk about one of the ones we're hearing about,
Mhm.
and this is definitely something, it'll be interesting if it's recorded as one of the top challenge titles. And this is, again, what Julia was mentioning, that so much stuff goes unreported. So if you look at the top 10 from last year, you'll note that New Kid or Mouse do not pop up in the top 10 because so many things go unreported. And also, I mean, how do you even tabulate when something is pulled from a whole school district or a whole library system? I mean, it's not a one-for-one thing. So even though the OIF, the Office of Intellectual Freedom, is one of the largest capturers of what's been going on and the largest historically, they've been tabulating data since 1990. Freedom to Read's been doing a good job, and other organizations, but in terms of longevity, the Office of Intellectual Freedom is the largest and for the longest, but even with them, it's just a fraction. So one we are hearing about is Elise Gravel's Pink, Blue, and You. So this is targeted at a younger elementary audience. So it's questions for kids about gender. And I think it's important to note in all of the discussions about gender queer is the American Pediatric Association has gender affirming care as a best practice and has for years. So we are a profession that talks about building on best practices, being very research based. And I think far too many library staff are forgetting that medical best practices are to follow gender affirming care and to have books that reflect our communities and our experiences. So if you choose not to read to second graders, Pink, Blue, and You, which happens to be, according to my friend who's a second grade teacher, one of the most popular books with her students, you are making, decisions about self-censoring. And I understand that depending on the library in this scenario, like, it's all relative, but I just think it's important to point out that we also need to follow the research that's out there, and it's just also just a beautiful comic, and Elise Gravel does exceptional illustrations on so many different topics. So.
Excellent. There was a question about whether we circulate TTRPG players handbooks. All of my institutions have, but I'm in academic institutions, and I think that we deal less with these the kinds of challenges that y'all deal with on a regular basis. Go ahead, Sean.
So I'm currently at Carroll County Public Library in Maryland, and we do collect and circulate game manuals. I know for a fact that we purchase the newest D&D manuals and supplementary guides as they come out. I think we have some Pathfinder and some Warhammer books as well. There's a pretty big Warhammer community up here. Before this, I just started up here this year. I was in Jacksonville, Florida for a long, long time. So we talk about, the scary places for challenges. I was in one. And we collected game materials there as well. Not everything, but a lot of the core books. Like you could definitely get the most current, player's handbook, DM's guide, so that basically anything that we would use to run a program for these, because we did have D&D clubs and Magic clubs. If they needed materials for that could circulate, we did. If we're buying it for a library collection anyway, we might as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am at a very tiny library. So we do have the core D&D books, and I am pushing for more books, for more resources. But at the moment, we don't have them. Hopefully that will change. But I've definitely noticed in the last couple of years that there's been a huge amount of interest in playing lots of games and playing D&D, yes, because of things like Stranger Things. But that's usually branched out very quickly into playing lots of other kinds of games. And so I think that, again, maybe, if you're watching and comics are your thing and you don't do as much in the game area, it's probably still going to be there at some point, most likely, just because there is a good amount of demand right now. So it's still something to keep on your radar.
And circling back, I feel like halfway through the conversation, Sean had talked about how visual media is one of the reasons why the visualness of it and the easily graspableness of it. If we're thinking about games and what might get censored and what might we think about to create our policies for video games and clips, and like especially with actual play being a thing that's very accessible right now, and anybody can see, oh well, that person shot that person in this very graphic way, or there's violence in this video game, that might be definitely a direction to consider, versus maybe if you're thinking about Catan or an abstract game like Quirkle or something is less obvious. Like even though an abstract game might have violent themes, chess is terribly, it's war, my friends, but the abstract of itness can, I feel in some ways prevent people from going directly towards that. And I still think people still don't know games are in the library anyway. We're trying our very best to get them to understand they're there. So and then maybe once again, like the pieces of media like that are very out there in the kind of world that are getting a lot of attention because Dungeons and Dragons movie came out. Chris Pine is saying go play that in schools. Do you guys find that things that are in media, kind of the very popular things that are coming out because of either awards or it's on book talk or it's being kind of on the minds of a lot of people because it's an excellent piece of media, are those the ones that also get challenged because it just has kind of that wow factor, or that people are talking about it?
That's definitely the most likely things that are going to get challenged. So once one community action group discovers a title, like I keep going back to genderqueer because I like it, but it could be any other title that's been challenged. One, it could be mouse, it could be whatever. Once that gets noticed and gets kind of a little bit of popularity in media, you do see more challenges nationwide kind of pop up from that. As far as challenging like board games or tabletop games where the visual aspect isn't as strong, I wouldn't worry about that as much with board games. I would worry about games that have a wagering mechanic or a gambling mechanic. I could see that being an issue, but a lot of them don't.
I don't see a lot of people getting super angry about Wingspan. Like, no, you won't collect those birds, right? But
I could definitely see
against humanity.
Right.
Like back when Magic the Gathering had anti-rules, like way back, I could see that being a potential problem. But
I hadn't even thought of the gambling mechanics because it's just so like it's all
Know
percentages.
the laws where your libraries are. Know
Yeah,
the
the
obscenity
gambling
laws. Know the
laws.
gambling laws.
Yeah, no, Cards Against Humanity is a big one. I know Julie just mentioned that. There's a new game called Ransom Notes that a lot of our patrons love, but can get risque. And I think that's partially where the issue can lie with games, is because it's not just like, here's the narrative, it's they have agency to create their own narratives, and sometimes
Mhm.
people do whatever they want to do that's different, you know. And I know that for me, with my game programs, I've tried to make sure, especially if I'm running them with teens, you know, that, hey, we're setting up rules in the beginning and we have safety tools, and we make sure that they know there are some topics that are off limits, and that, you know, it's okay, we can pause, we can back up, stuff like that. But I also know that a lot of people who aren't as invested in games don't know about those kinds of things, don't know about the safety tools, don't know about how we work to keep those things in line, you know. And that's just another aspect of, you know, making sure that your community is aware of you, aware of what you do. Like, make it clear to them at the outset, if at all possible, what you're doing. And I really liked what Amy mentioned about, I don't remember what library it was that you said had the little talking points. Yes. That's another thing. Have talking points. Have copies of your collection development policy that you can hand out to people, you know, but you can also have talking points about what you're doing in these game programs, or any kind of programs, you know, that make things safe for people. So.
And also just the library Bill of Rights, like have that visible right when people walk in. And just from the get-go, you know, have that attached to your card policy. So when they register for a card, that is cooked in there. I think there's a lot of places where you and your policy can reiterate what your collection development and your reconsideration policy have.
I think also lastly, when we talk a lot about community outreach and advocacy, I don't think we talk about enough, especially when we talk about comics and games, the need to still build that advocacy within our own profession. I mean, if a challenge comes up or even a question is asked about video gaming and literacy or comics and literacy, like we need to have everybody on the same page. That I mean, I was talking with a few of the board members who've been around for a while, and we were all like, how long have you been giving the same presentation? Because I feel like I've been giving a Comics 101 presentation for 10 years. Robin Brenner, of course, she's like 20 years. And so, but I do think it speaks to the need to still have these discussions. I know, especially for comics, I don't think most people realize how pervasive the comic censorship hearings of the 1950s were, especially in terms of vocational impact and like ideas about reading. It was so baked into a lot of the censorship stuff that comics were bad reading, beyond the whole very like bombastic juvenile delinquency and this and that, was also this idea that like your child is going to like develop problems with reading if they only read comics, when in fact like a lot of educational researchers have been, I mean, even the 1950s, but especially so now, we're like, oh no, actually, like this is a multimodal way. Like they have words and they have images and are learning to read between the panels and all this stuff. But I think for so many people, these prejudices are so built in and they don't even realize it. And we see this pop up so much in our own professions still.
I love that you talked to that, Amy, because in the games, like we have so many types of games, a game for every gamer. And so even within just video games, it's not just first person shooter, it's cozy comfort like Sun Haven or Stardew Valley, or maybe there's a lonely just walking, you can just be a walking person, you can just walk and look at scenery. That's a whole genre. And then even within TTRPGs, everybody thinks Dungeons and Dragons, but I think, like you said, I'm always and forever saying,
world out there.
Yeah, there's a whole world, and knowing what we all do and what we all have to offer and how, you know, our unique perspectives are kind of embedded in our different librarianship, I think really is a wonderful way to kind of end this session, and then to kind of our next step forward is to go and talk to each other about what we love, our passions, what they bring to librarianship, and how we can all work together to get to a better place. So I thank all of you so very, very much. I'm going to let you all give kind of a parting statement, and then thank you all, chat. So floor is all of yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, remember community outreach. I know I've really screamed about it a lot, but community outreach and being aware of the nuance of whatever legislation is being proposed and knowing how to push back on specific sections. Make sure that you have your ducks in a row.
And then if you'd like to go, Julia.
Sure. Train everyone, every staff member, I don't care who they are, needs to have their training. And all of them, you can print out our graphic novel toolkit. It's very foldable. Put it in your wallet, keep it out so you can whip it out whenever it comes up, because it's a when, not an if.
And then you can go ahead, Sean.
Parting words. I don't know. Know your policy, revise your policy, apply your policy equally to all types of materials, all types of content. Know the actual laws so that when people say something's obscene, or if they call you a groomer or whatever, know what those actually mean, know what they actually mean legally so that you can push back. Because if someone calls you a groomer for having a game or a comic in the library, that's libel. That's so in addition to building your collection and defending your collection, know your own rights as a person, as a librarian. Just do what you need to survive.
And Amy.
Our sign off is be prepared, fight censorship, and live to library another day.
I love it. All right. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you all for participating in this roundtable. This has been Games and Gaming Roundtable. We'll see you later.